82 movies, two renowned Oscar statuettes, Robert Darrow could have easily claimed his throne among the Hollywood kings, but it was his own mouth, with its careless and outrageous political comments, that destroyed everything he had built. An empire collapsed, new films became box office fail. Here's the media. Ripped him apart, his family fell apart. Is this the cost he must pay for his deeds now? At 81, Robert Darrow's career is spiraling into a crisis more concerning than ever before. It started with a single sentence, a jab, thrown into the on a humid June evening in 2024. Robert Darrow sat in front of camera recording a message about the presidential election. What came out of his mouth was a Molotov cocktail thrown into the political arena. He said, "He's so blatantly stupid." His voice low and gruff, each word dripping with disdain. He's a punk, a dog, a pig, a con artist, a mutt who doesn't know what he's talking about. I'd like to punch him in the face. Darrow was discussing Donald Trump and did not hold back. Shared and reshared by those who saw him as a hero confronting a bully, video struck the internet like a thunderclap, amassing millions of views in hours. Back then, Darrow was untouchable. Goodfellas, The Godfather, Taxi Driver, Raging Bull. He had built an empire of respect, a career spanning decades that had shaped generations. He could say whatever he wanted and the world would listen. The years rolled on and Darrow didn't let up. He was on the stage at the Tony Awards, the lights bright, the audience buzzing with anticipation. He was introduced as a legend, a titan of the screen, and he approached the microphone with the confidence of someone who understood his value. "I'm going to say one thing," he said, voice steady but charged with defiance, pausing just long enough to let the tension build. "Fod Trump." The crowd erupted, some shocked, some ecstatic, many leaping to their feet in a standing ovation. "It's no longer down with Trump," he said, doubling down as the cheers grew louder. "It's Trump." The cameras caught every second, beaming it out to millions, and once again the internet went crazy. He walked off that stage with his head high. That night marked a turning point, not of triumph, but of trouble. He'd been loud about his hatred for the president before, but this time it felt different. Sharper, and almost as if the universe heard him and decided to punish him. His life began to crumble right after those words left his mouth. What followed wasn't just a bad week or a rough patch. It was a slow, brutal descent into a nightmare that would strip him of the first sign of trouble. Came fast. Just weeks after that rally rant, when whispers started circulating in Hollywood, Darrow had spent decades as a titan, a name that could sell tickets on its own, a guy who could walk into a room and make everyone stop talking just to watch him. But now the air around him was changing. Studio execs used to kiss his ring were dodging his calls. His agent, a wiry guy named Paul, who'd been with him since the Raging Bull days, started sounding nervous on the phone. "Bob, it's not personal," Paul said one July afternoon, his voice crackling over the line as Darrow sat in his New York penthouse gazing out at the skyline. "It's just the climate's weird right now. People are touchy. That Trump stuff, it's got folks riled up." But this felt different. It was as though punches were coming from all directions and he couldn't tell who was throwing them. That flicker became a flame when the Alto night began to take shape. A $45 million bet promising to revive his fading star with a bold twist. He would play not one but two mobsters in a single film. The excitement was palpable. A chance for the man who gave us Goodfellas in Casino to show he still had the fire that once lit up screens all over the world. And for Warner Brothers studio eager for a hit, it was a calculated risk worth taking. But as the opening weekend figures came in, the dream collapsed with a sickening thud. $3. $2 million from $2, 651 theaters, a pitiful $1. 26 per screen, barely sufficient to keep the projectors running. The worldwide total crept to a meager $5 million, leaving a gaping $40 million hole in the budget before marketing expenses even came into play. And the weight of that failure struck like a hammer to a once untouchable man. This was not only a flop, It was a disaster revealing a painful truth: the king of the mobster flick had fallen, and he was falling hard. The first sign of trouble came fast just weeks after that rally rant, when whispers started circulating in Hollywood. Darrow had spent decades as a titan, a name that could sell tickets on its own, a guy who could walk into a room and make everyone stop talking just to watch him. But now the air around him was changing. Studio execs who used to kiss his ring were dodging his calls. His agent, a wiry guy named Paul, who'd been with him since the Raging Bull days. "Bob, it's not personal," Paul said one July afternoon, his voice crackling over the phone as Darrow sat in his New York penthouse gazing out at the skyline. "It's just the climate's weird right now. People are touchy. That Trump stuff, it's got folks riled up." Darrow gripped the phone tighter, his knuckles turning white, and snapped back, "What? They're mad. I told the truth." Let him be mad. He hung up, his chest tight with rage, but deep down a flicker of concern ignited. He had always fought, but this felt different, as though the punches were coming from all directions and he could not see who was throwing them. When the Alto night began to take shape, that flicker became a flame, a $45 million gamble promising to resurrect his fading star with a bold twist. He would play not one but two mobsters in a single film. The excitement was palpable. A chance for the man who gave us Goodfellas and Casino to show he still had the fire that once illuminated screens all around the world. For Warner Brothers, a studio eager for a hit, it was a calculated gamble worth taking. But as the opening weekend figures came in, the dream collapsed with a sickening thud. $3. $2 million from $2. 651 theaters, a pitiful $1. 26 per screen, barely sufficient to keep the projectors running. The worldwide total crept to a meager $5 million, leaving a gaping $40 million hole in the budget before marketing expenses even came into play. And the weight of that failure struck like a crushing blow to a man who had once been untouchable. Once untouchable, this was not just a failure but a disaster revealing a painful reality. The king of the mobster film had fallen and was falling hard. The story of the Alto Nights starts with great expectations, but from the moment the trailers hit, something felt off. There he was, growling lines like "I'm a gangster, that's it, that's the life," in heavy makeup and prosthetics. But instead of menace, it came across as awkward, almost comical. The online chatter turned brutal, with ex-users joking it looked like Darrow yelling at his own reflection. The marketing was a disaster as well. Barely a whisper on television, critics later tore it apart, giving it a 38% on Rotten Tomatoes and calling it a tired retread of a genre Darrow had already conquered. While the 70% audience score felt hollow, supported by a small group of loyalists overshadowed by the millions who stayed away, the movie itself was a failure. No doubt that stage had been crumbling for years. By 2024, Darrow's tirades against Donald Trump and his supporters had reached a fever pitch as he let his off-screen rage overshadow his on-screen brilliance. "I'd want to punch him in the face about Trump." Instead of retreating to lick his wounds, the Alto Nights failure caused him to double down and launch a rant to Variety that sounded like a scream. "I believe it is rather clear where the know-it. All critics are coming from against our film, which centers on the life of a gangster. It becomes quite clear that we know now we are facing the MAGA crowd, which has one goal: to destroy cinema and entertainment for others who wish to see a wonderful piece of art like the Alto Nights, which I believe was a privilege to be a part of this great film." The words dripped with defiance but landed like a plea, and when he added, "It really is all Trump's fault that cinema is dying before our very own eyes," he struck a chord. The desperation was palpable, a man clinging to a narrative that absolved him of blame. The backlash was immediate, fierce, and unforgiving. X lit up with scorn, one user writing, "He's blaming Trump for a movie nobody wanted to see," while another said Darrow lost it. And so has his audience, and sting of those words cut deep, a public rejection that echoed far beyond the mega supporters he targeted. That rejection wasn't just noise, it was measurable, a tidal wave of apathy crashing over a man who'd once packed theaters with ease. A YouGov poll in early 2025 revealed 62% of Americans now viewed Darrow unfavorably, a sharp decline from the 78% who adored him 10 years ago. His classics The Godfather Part 2 Raging Bull saw streaming viewership drop 34% since 2020 according to a Nielsen report, with fans confessing they could no longer distinguish the art from the artist. An ex-post, summing it up, I hear him call me scum every time I try to watch Goodfellas. This wasn't the first warning sign. His 2024 Netflix series 0 Hour had flopped too. Flopped too ignored despite his cries for attention, and producers had begged him to keep politics out of the press tour, a request he ignored, ranting about Trump instead. Now with the Alto Nights, that pattern of self-sabotage reached its peak, and Warner Brothers, already bleeding from a $60 million plus loss on the film, once marketing was factored in, had seen enough they'd cut ties with him months earlier, citing his declining box office draw. To The Hollywood Reporter, a decision that felt cold but inevitable. Goodfellas made $47 million in 1990, over $100 million today, on a $25 million budget, while the Alto Nights couldn't scrape together a tenth of that after this most recent disaster, a fall so steep it left audiences reeling, mourning the loss of a giant who seemed intent to bury himself. That burial felt all the more tragic because Darrow, at 81, couldn't see it coming. He still saw himself as the titan of old, pouring his soul into the Alto Nights, telling Variety, "The Alto Nights is a film I had to give up a lot of my time to invest in these extremely complicated characters, really bring the life of a gangster to the big screen." But the reality was harsh. His age showed in every frame, his once sharp edge dulled by time, and the dual role that was meant to dazzle instead felt gimmicky. Critics pointed out that both characters sounded like Darrow being loud and grumpy. Fans didn't buy it either. Why watch him play two mobsters in 2025 when Casino still told a better story by a younger, hungrier Darrow? The exhaustion was shared. Audiences were fed up with the same old shtick, and Hollywood was fed up with his baggage, joining a roster of outspoken stars like George Clooney and Alec Baldwin, whose rants had outpaced their relevance. Darrow's defense of diversity initiatives. What some studios are doing right now because of Trump is also alarming. The fear to accept diversity, equity, and inclusion rang hollow given Trump. His own film failed without any agenda to blame, thus proving the issue was not politics but rather him, a man out of sync with a society that had moved on. The failure didn't just sting, it bled him dry. The studio lost millions and didn't conceal their rage. An executive told him over the phone, voice dripping with blame, "You're the reason," adding, "People don't want to see you right now." He hung up shocked. He couldn't dispute that ticket sales were falling and Alto Niro would be removed from screens in a few weeks, a ghost of a film no one cared about. He had pleaded with the producers to take a chance on it, fought for every dollar of that budget, and now it was a failure directly related to him. After that, he stopped going out, since he couldn't bear the looks of pity from friends and smirks from strangers. Friends attempted to contact him. Scorsese left voicemails. Pacino sent texts, but he ignored them all. "What is there to say?" he would mutter, staring at the blank walls. Muttering at the bare walls, he'd say, "I'm done." The king of the mob flick, the man who had once filled theaters, was now a joke, and the shame of it burned hotter than any rage he'd ever experienced. That's when the family trouble hit, and it hit hard on March 20th. His ex-wife Grace called him, her voice sharp and panicked in a way he hadn't heard since their messiest divorce days. "Bob, the kids are getting letters," she said, and he could hear her pacing on the other end. "Hate mail, threats, stuff about you." They're scared. Darrow's stomach dropped a cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. His older kids, Dina Raphael, the twins had dealt with fame's downsides before shrugging off paparazzi and trolls with the toughness he taught them. But this was new uglier Grace sent him photos of the letters your dad's, a traitor hope, he pays Darrow's a dead man. Walking watch your back one addressed to his toddler daughters, Nanny was worse tell Bobby his time's up. He stared at the words, his breath shallow, his mind racing his soft spot. His reason to carry on was his youngest just 2 years old, born late in his life to a woman he loved fiercely. Now, she was a target as well. He called Grace back, his voice saying, "I'll fix this." But he had no idea how. This was no longer only about him, it was also about the individuals he would die for, and they were suffering as a result of his big mouth. The threats continued beyond letters. 2 days later, on March 22, he received a text from an unknown number saying, "You should have stayed quiet, Bobby." No name, no trace, just those words glowing on his screen like a warning shot. Just those words glowing on his screen like a warning shot, no trace. He stared at it for an hour, heart racing, trying to determine who had sent it. Was it a random troll, an angry fan, or something more serious? Someone with genuine influence who could follow through on the threat. He didn't respond. He didn't know what to say, but the message lingered in his mind like a splinter. He began checking the locks on his doors twice, then 3 times, and looked over his shoulder every time he left the building. The tough guy from Taxi Driver, who had stared down the world without blinking, was terrified and despised himself for it. Yet the dread was genuine and growing, a shadow he couldn't shake. Hollywood delivered the next punch, which was a knockout. Warner Brothers, the studio that had supported some of his greatest successes, acted in a way that left him reeling. He had been scheduled for a significant mob boss film set for 2027, with a $20 million salary dangling in front of him, a chance to return to the shoes he had worn so well in Casino and Goodfellas. It was perfect, a gritty old school part that could remind the world why he was a legend. But then the call came. David Zaslav, the CEO, didn't mince words. "We're cutting you," he said, voice cold and final. "You're risky." Fellas, it was ideal. A gritty old school part that could remind the world why he was a star. But then the call came. David Zaslav, the CEO, didn't mince words. "We're cutting you," he said, voice steely and definitive. "You're too risky." Darrow couldn't believe it. They cited his outspoken personality, those passionate outbursts that had once garnered him accolades, but now made executives anxious. The project was dead, and completely abandoned. $20 million vanished in a cloud of smoke from his New York penthouse. He sat, his hand curled into fists. "Foolish," he said in disbelief, his voice shaking. "They're fools." Replaying the conversation in his head, he paced the floor for hours, the carpet wearing thin under his steps, threatening to sue, calling his lawyers, demanding they fight back. But deep down he knew it was a losing battle. Warner wasn't stopping there. They pulled him from flashback scenes in Joker 3, a small but significant part he'd been looking forward to, and then axed him from a 2026 action thriller 2. One by one, the chances vanished, and the phone that once rang off the hook went silent. On March 25th, he met Paul at Warner Brothers' LA office. Paul wouldn't look at him, just shuffled papers and cleared his throat. "They're cutting you loose, Bob," he said finally, his voice flat. "Alto nights tanked, and they're done. No more projects. They're calling it a business decision." Darrow chuckled, a cruel, bitter laugh that caused Paul to wince. "A business decision after all I've done for them. I made the millions, and now I'm trash," he said, leaning forward and gripping the table. This was more than just a professional blow. It was exile from the only world he had ever known. The rejection cut deeper than he had anticipated. He had always been the guy who could bounce back, who could turn a flop into a comeback, but this time the doors weren't just closed, they were bolted shut. He called old friends Scorsese, Pacino, and guys he'd bled with on set, and received voicemails or vague excuses saying they were busy with a project. Bob one said, "We'll catch up soon," but the soon never came. He scrolled through industry blogs and saw his name in headlines like Darrow's fall, how one rant ended a legend. The comments were harsh: he's a dinosaur, time to go, nobody cares about his mobster anymore. He sat in his hotel room with the curtains drawn and the TV flickering with some late-night talk. He called old friends Scorsese, Pacino, guys he'd bled with on set, and received voicemails or hazy excuses saying they were busy with a project. Bob once said, "We'll catch up soon," but the soon never arrived. He scrolled through industry blogs, spotting his name in headlines like Darrow's fall, how one rant destroyed a legend. The remarks were harsh: he's a dinosaur, time to go, nobody cares about his mobster anymore. He sat in his hotel room, curtains drawn, TV flickering with some late-night talk show, unable to hear over the noise in his head. He had given his life to this, nights away from his children, marriages that collapsed under the burden of his labor, a body that ached from years of pushing too hard, and now it was gone. He felt empty, like a house with all the furniture ripped out, and the loneliness struck him like a freight train. He couldn't hear over the noise in his head. He'd given his life to this nights away from his children, marriages that crumbled under the weight of his labor, a body that etched from years of pushing too hard. And now it was gone. He felt empty, like a house with all the furniture ripped out, and loneliness hit him like a freight train. Other studios started backing away. Too Universal whispered about dropping him from a family film. Paramount passed on a script he'd pitched. He's toxic. He overheard someone say at a party, the words cutting deeper than any critic's review: toxic. Him, the man who'd given the world Travis Bickle and Vito Corleone, he couldn't wrap his head around it. He'd sit in his office, surrounded by awards, Oscars, Golden Globes, plaques from a lifetime of work, and feel like they were mocking him. He didn't want to admit it, but he was scared that his career, the thing he'd built brick by brick, was slipping through his fingers. The guilt was a weight he couldn't shake, and that guilt grew heavier with every passing day. Finally, it became intolerable. His grandson, Niro, just 19, bright, humorous, a youngster with a future ahead of him. But one night the phone rang and Dina's voice came through, choked with weeping. "He's gone, Dad," she whispered, barely audible. "Lo's gone. An overdose, pills. They said found in his apartment, his body cold by the time help arrived." Darrow dropped the phone. The family gathered for the funeral, but he couldn't go, couldn't face Dina's accusing stare, couldn't stand the whispers. "If I'd been there," he whispered over and over the words, a mantra of regret. "If I hadn't let this take me over." He trailed off the thought, too big, too awful to finish. The press didn't let up. They pounced, splashing the tragedy across every front page. Darrow's neglect blamed for one headline read, bold and merciless: "Family falls apart as actor obsesses," said another. Sources anonymous, of course, claimed he'd ignored Niro's struggles, too wrapped up in his own battles to notice the kid slipping away. The pain of losing his family was a wound that wouldn't heal, but the world wasn't done with him yet. Public humiliation was waiting, and it hit with a cruelty that left him gasping. In May 2025, he'd been set to receive a leadership award from the National Association of Broadcasters. He had spent weeks crafting a speech, pouring his heart into every line, picturing the applause, the respect. But then the call came just days before the event. "We're revoking it." The voice on the other end said, flat and unapologetic, "Your comments, your reputation, it's too divisive." He remained there all night. The speech crumpled on the counter above him, the words he'd never say staring down like a cruel joke. The room tilting around him, phone pressed to his ear. By morning, the news was everywhere. X lit up with it on Darrow Dunn, trending alongside clips of his old rants twisted into memes mocking him. "Trump nah, you Bobby," one post read, racking up likes by the thousands. He saw it on his laptop. Each comment was a fresh cut, people laughing and calling him washed up, irrelevant. The War Can't Fix, his latest directorial and starring venture, had crashed into theaters like a meteor, only to fizzle out in a cloud of apathy. Released in late 2024, the film, a jumbled political drama about a divided America, entered into theaters like a meteor and then fizzled out in a cloud of indifference, grossing a paltry $3 million worldwide on a $65 million budget, according to Box Office Mojo. Critics tore it apart. Rotten Tomatoes gave it a 23% approval rating. Variety called it a preaky incoherent disaster that squandered Darrow's gravitas. Audiences stayed away in droves. Its opening weekend brought in only $4. Once Darrow's name alone could command respect, his presence a guarantee of intensity and depth from Taxi Driver's brooding Travis Bickle to Goodfellas' icy Jimmy Conway. He built a legacy of 82 films, 2 Oscars, and a box office haul exceeding $5 billion globally per IMDb data. Directors like Martin Scorsese and Francis Ford Coppola turned to him to anchor their masterpieces, but the 21st century has been less kind. Anchor their works of art, but the 21st century has been less kind since 2000. His filmography has bloated with duds. Dirty Grand Paw 11% on Rotten Tomatoes, The Family 28%, and Grudge match 31% each, a step further from the artistry of his prime. By 2025, The War Can't Fix wasn't just another misstep, it was the climactic proof of his descent, a film so misguided it couldn't even capitalize on the polarized political climate it aimed to skewer. Darrow's downfall isn't just about box office flops or late-night rants, are a slow bleed of credibility. A titan undone by his own decisions. His obsession with Trump, which has been clear since 2016, has evolved from righteous anger into a caricature. "This is a dangerous person, a stupid person, and that's a terrible mix," he said on Kimmel, his face contorted with rage. Yet the more he fumed, the less he resembled the stoic genius of Heat. Instead, he reflected the unhinged rants of Trump himself, a mirror image of madness, and he confessed, "I think he has derangement syndrome about us too." The irony was lost on no one. The figures tell a sad story. Darrow's last critical success, The Irishman, came 6 years ago, a Netflix-backed oddity in a decade of mediocrity. Since then, his films have averaged a 34% Rotten Tomato rating, a far cry from the 87% average of his 1970s and 1980s output. His box office draw has plummeted. War Can't Fix's 12. The $3 million take is a 94% drop from Meet the Parents' $330 million haul in 2000 adjusted for inflation. Studios once eager to fund his passion project now hesitate. He's become a liability. An anonymous studio executive told The Hollywood Reporter in January 2025, "The audience doesn't care anymore. They see him as a relic yelling about politics, not an actor." Compare this to his peers. Al Pacino, at 84, still commands respect with selective roles in The Irishman and House of Gucci. Jack Nicholson retired in 2010, leaving on a high note with The Departed. $3 million is a 94% decline from Meet the Parents' $330 million haul in 2000, adjusted for inflation. Studios once eager to bankroll his passion projects now hesitate. He's become a liability, an anonymous studio exec told The Hollywood Reporter in January 2025. The audience doesn't care anymore. They see him as a relic yelling about politics, not an actor. Compare this to his peers. Al Pacino, at 84, still commands respect with selective roles like The Irishman and House of Gucci. Jack Nicholson, retired since 2010, left on a high note with The Departed. Darrow, at 81, he continues to swing and miss. His Trump obsession, once a rallying cry, now seems like a crutch. "I felt I had to say something about it to go on record," he said to Kimmel, defending his outburst. But what record?